Welcome, everybody, to our annual Zekelman Standards demonstration. I know that this is a very diverse group. Some of you have been using the standards for a while. Some of you have heard about them, and this is a good first opportunity to see what it's all about. So we'll begin. The Zekelman Standards were developed by a team of educators for Chumash primarily, but as you'll see soon enough, some of the areas do pertain to other subjects. We also have a beta version for Gemara that some schools are using and piloting. They are generously sponsored by Mr. Alan Zekelman, who is a real patron of Jewish education. And our aim is always to create independent and inspired lifelong learners. So what this means is that students have the ability to learn not only passively and receptively, but independently and proactively. That once they have completed schooling with us, they then have both the ability and the impetus to open up a Chumash and learn it on their own in a rich and meaningful way. And ability and impetus are very much related because people feel motivated to do things that they feel capable of doing. So this is our aim in developing the Zekelman standards, and they present 8 grade levels of skills broken down by different skill area, allowing us to curriculum map, measure and assess our students' progress, and make sure that they're reaching our goals for them in Chumash. So before we go through the website, I just want to introduce the analogy, which you may have heard before if you've been working with us, of a GPS. A GPS is intended to help a passenger in a car reach their destination on any given journey. So what are the components that are needed for a GPS? So first of all, you need to plug in your destination. You need to know where you're going. It's not enough to just say, we're here to learn Chumash, we're here to learn Pasuk Aleph, Pasuk Beis. The same way it's not enough to get into the car and say, we just want to take a road trip. We need to have clear and discrete destinations that are specific enough in order to be able to plot a course to get there. Once we have the destination, the GPS goes ahead and plans the most effective route. That is the teacher's job in curriculum planning, which is not provided for you by the standards, but is it gives you a framework within which to do so more effectively. And finally, what happens if you get lost? What happens if you take a wrong turn or there's some kind of a roadblock? So does the GPS just keep on spewing out the same old route that it plotted on, when you first got into the car? If it did that, it wouldn't be of much help, not to me anyway. An effective GPS recalculates and finds a new route because its job is to get you to its destination. Similarly, as teachers, our job is not simply to teach. Our job is not simply to carry out the plan we came up with before the first day of school, however wonderful a plan it may have been. Our job is to get our students to the destination that we set for them within independent and inspired Chumash learning. Now, for every student that might need a different route, students might veer off in this direction and that direction. One student needs more help with the vocabulary and another student needs more help with the comprehension. And knowing where each student is holding, because we have these benchmarks of where they should be holding or could be holding, we can assess them relative to those benchmarks, allows us to then recalculate and plot our new route for bringing every single student to the destination, to the learning goals that we've set out for them. So what I just described for you is a process called data-driven instruction, DDI, which means that you first need standards, and then you need assessment on a regular basis. And those two things together will allow you to create effective learning plans and for each individual student to meet their goals. Now, today we'll focus on the standards themselves only, and they're most useful within the full context, within that full picture, which we can talk about in other webinars or we have spoken about, or you can work with in your own way. But the standards themselves will already be helpful in allowing us to set very specific goals for our students in the various different grade levels. And I also want to share with you the different resources that we've developed and called in order to enable you to teach these skills. So let's go right ahead. We're on zekelmanstandards.org. Put a 1 in the chat box if you have been onto zekelmanstandards.org before. And are there any questions or comments before we continue? Put a 1 in the chat if you have been onto zekelmanstandards.org before. Okay, 1 person, excellent. So this is definitely very, it's a great opportunity for the rest of us and hopefully for you as well. So let's get to it. This is the home page. The first thing that you're going to want to do is obviously to log in or register. So when you click on log in register, if you've never signed in before, you'll click here and then it's pretty self-explanatory to create your own account, which you'll use to sign in whenever you want to utilize the standards and the resources. And what this does for you is that it actually keeps track of all the downloads if you already downloaded and purchased, so that if you lost the file, you don't need to go and purchase it again. You could find it in your account so long as you have your username and password and account all set up. So the first thing that we're going to do is browse the standards. Okay. So when you click on Browse Standards, you'll see that we have 6 standard areas. And these are basically the 6 steps that we divided Chumash learning into, the 6 components rather, because it's not sequential, they all really happen at the same time, that allow you to become an independent and inspired Chumash learner. So the standard 1 is Torah B'chsav Essentials. These are all the things that are needed as a prerequisite to learning Chumash in the text. So prerequisite doesn't only mean in time, but it also means just as foundations. They're constantly there informing and imbuing and contextualizing the learning. So we'll go into more detail soon about what Torah B'chsav Essentials includes, but this ranges from the hashkafic fundamentals of what is Torah, the halacha with which we approach a Chumash, the ability to navigate in a Chumash, the ability to identify all the different dots and squiggles you see in the Chumash, and also know that they are part of our Messiah, and so forth. Standard 2 is content. Content is the storyline, the information, the things that we want students to retain. This is really important. It can also serve as a guide for your Parsha class. Content is important because it's Yedias HaTorah, and these are the lessons that we want students to take with them for life, and they need knowledge to base those lessons on. And in addition, not all students excel at the more technical textual skills, but if we give equal validity to the content, to the knowledge, to the teichen of the Chumash that they're learning, some students really have the opportunity to shine. And again, this is divided up into different areas, which we'll look at soon. Standard 3, vocabulary and language skills, is the most complex and maybe the longest area of the standards, because essentially we want students to be able to interact with the Chumash directly and not need a translation. And the reason why this is so important is because, first of all, this is their heritage, this is their Messiah, and by giving them the vocabulary and the awareness of Lashon HaKodesh to be able to access it on their own, it's really their birthright. Secondly, any translation is by definition interpretive. If you open up several translations of the Chumash side by side, they will almost never be identical. And furthermore, the Mefarshim, so much of what they're doing is analyzing the words and the verbiage and the diktuk of the psukim, and they gain incredible harais and limudim from these different nuances in the language itself, which we would not be able to appreciate if we were learning it in translation. So this is the vocabulary and language skills area. Standard 4 is comprehension. You get students who can translate everything word for word, but what about actually integrating that knowledge? What about being able to then interpret and decipher what is the who, what, where, when of what I just learned? What are the lessons? How does this compare to another topic I learned? The higher order thinking, and so forth. Standard 5 is Rashi skills, which includes the practical skills of translations, Rashi Tevis, Rashi letters, if your school sees fit, as well as a real the comprehension of Rashi. And Standard 6, Mefarshim, follows a similar pattern to the Rashi standards. So everyone with me so far? Okay. So let's go into one of the standards and see what it looks like. Whoops. Okay, so if you click on one of the standards, you'll see a little introduction to what standard this is. And it says use the menu on the left to navigate the various parts of standard 1. So we haven't actually gone to the standards yet. We do have like a landing page for standard 1, Torah Essentials, with all the resources for that standard right here. Now you want to really break it down further. So you have the nature and purpose of Torah Shebachsav, which is the Hashkafa, Tanakh conventions, which is the format of the way the Chumash presents itself, as opposed to Sefer Torah, etc. And you have the text referencing skills, which is the navigation, the psukim, the prakim, the gematria, etc. So let's go into the nature and purpose of Torah Shebachsav. Standard 1.01 talks about Chachmasai Ritzanei Shel Kadosh Baruch Hu. Standard 1.02 talks about Torah Milash and Hara. Let's go into 1.01. Okay. And this is a standard itself. Now, each standard is preceded by enduring understandings and essential questions. These follow the curriculum format of UBD, Understanding by Design, which some of you have learned about this week with Dr. Sarah Rosenfeld. The enduring understandings are really the things which, if we think about what's that one thing we want our students to remember when they leave school beyond the details, these are the conceptual basis of what we're teaching them. We don't articulate them directly, but rather every single lesson we give is pointing towards these understandings, and you can browse them here on the screen. The essential questions are the questions which don't have one right answer, which aren't spit back questions, but are the questions that are constantly coming up in class, which direct you towards these understandings. So this is kind of a prelude that appears before each standard. Okay, now let's look at the standard itself. 1.01 Chachmasei Ritzanei Shel Kadosh Baruch Hu. For grade 1, 1.01a is that they relate to a Sefer Chumash with respect and affection as prescribed by halacha and minhag. B relates to study of Chumash with appropriate reverence according to halacha. So one is the Chumash itself, two is the study of Chumash. C knows that time spent learning Torah is an opportunity to fulfill the mitzvah and daily chiyuv of limud Torah. D identifies the Chumash text as the identical text found in other printed Chumashim in a Sefer Torah. E is something that applies in other grades, but not in grade 1, and so forth. Let's look at grade 2. It's pretty similar with some changes. Typically, every 2 grade levels in the standards is quite similar. So in one grade you're teaching, in the next grade you're reinforcing. Grade 3, you have a lot more content. Okay, by the time you get up to grade 8, you're citing Yud Gimel Ikri Emunah to talk about the divine origin and unchanging nature of the Torah. This is one way to view the standards. Now, another way to view the standards is, instead of grade by grade, let's look at one standard and see its scope and sequence throughout the grades. So A and B were the same for grades 1 to 8, but in C, the rigor increases as we go up in the grades. So you can see the different levels of what does it mean to understand the mitzvah of limud haTorah. In grades 1 and 2, we talk about the mitzvah itself. In grades 3 to 6, we're talking about the opportunity to connect to Hashem. And in grades 7 to 8, we're talking about the exceptional unity that you achieve with Hashem by connecting to him through his Torah. Okay. In grades 1 to 2 for 1.01D, we're coming to the realization that the Chumash and the Sefer Torah have the exact same content. In grades 3 to 6, we unpack this a little bit further, understand that this was true throughout history and throughout geography as well. And in grades 7 and 8, we're bringing it into the source in the Rambam. Okay, and so on and so forth. So these were two different views of the same standard. You can look at it just for the grade that you're teaching, or you can look at it per skill to see the big picture of how the skill develops. Now, something interesting about the standards is that you can actually, in your mind, cross out the word grade and put in the word level instead. These were developed according to what is typically done and what is developmentally appropriate for the typical grade levels 1 to 8 and the ages of the students in them. And dividing up our overarching goals into 8 years of learning. However, if you think of this as levels, then any grade can start at a certain level where they find themselves, especially if they haven't done the standards until then. And you can determine that they're on level, your 5th grade is on level 3 for certain standards and on level 6 for other standards, and really customize the learning much more appropriately. Similarly, for an individual student, this scope and sequence from A to K really represents a ladder. No, sorry. Down here, this scope from grades 1 to 8 really represents a ladder of rigor in a particular skill, a particular standard. So each particular student might find themselves on another place of that ladder. It's a little bit more apparent when we go later on into the more technical skills. But we pre-assess to find out what level the student is on in the first place, and then we work to lift them up from one rung of the ladder to the next. This really gives you the ability to individualize and differentiate learning in a whole new way. It's especially useful for classrooms with multiple levels and multiple ages. So this is a standard themselves. Everyone doing okay so far? Okay. So this was the nature and purpose of Torah Shebachsav. And then you have all the different resources that relate to the nature and purpose of Torah Shebachsav. We'll talk about the resources a little bit later, and there's another way you can access them as well. You can scroll down or you can jump through the menu on the left, 1.02, Torah Lashon Hara, the standards, A, B, and C, the grade levels, the two different views, and the resources. Tanakh conventions, the Ksav, the ICAs, the Nikud, and the resources, the text referencing skills, the numerical value of letters, etc., etc. Are there any questions or comments? You can chat or you can just call out. Okay. Let's go back to Browse Standards. So you saw that when we clicked on Browse Standards, we had a page for all the standards, but when you just hover over it, you can jump right to the standard or the substandard that you're looking for. Content is divided into concrete knowledge and conceptual knowledge. Concrete knowledge is further divided into people, places, timelines, the lashonos of the Chumash, and so forth. And conceptual knowledge has the mitzvahs, the harais, and so on, which we want students to gain from the Chumash that they're learning. Vocabulary and language skills is divided, of course, into vocabulary itself, parts of speech, what are nouns, verbs, adjectives in Hebrew. It's really important to identify the function of each word. And one of the principles of how we teach them is that we make sure they understand it in their native language first, so you can work with your English teacher or actually give that lesson in your classroom. And we have templates for that before transferring it over into Lashon HaKodesh. The syntax, the sentence structure, the phrasing, for example, the way that you switch around the noun and the adjective between Hebrew and English. So Yeled Katan becomes small boy. That's one aspect of syntax. Another aspect of syntax is the trup that allows you to divide up the psukim, which is another very important tool for understanding. Havar Nikud, which is really enrichment. It's a higher level. It's there for the sake of completeness. But if you want to talk to your students about Mil'el, Milra, it does come up in some places in the Chumash. That's up to you. Passage comprehension skills is divided into finding information, the who, what, where, when in the pasuk. And as you can see, when you go into that standard, it is divided up according to the grades into levels of rigor based on whether they're finding information that they were already taught, whether they're finding information in new psukim, etc. Then you get the higher order thinking, the comparing and contrasting, the noticing anomalies and questions, which feed right into the learning of Rashi and Mefarshim, and the integrating knowledge, which, similar to Bloom's taxonomy, where the top level is creating the creative activity that takes everything from the bottom 6 levels of Bloom's and incorporates it and integrates it into something new that shows you understand. So integrating knowledge is a standard where we're asking students to show that they've internalized what they learned and are able to put together a product to demonstrate that. In Rashi skills, we have the reading and language as well as the Rashi comprehension, as we said before. Similarly with Mefarshim, we do have the reading, language, and comprehension, as well as the focus on identifying Mefarshim by their personalities, by their approaches, their backgrounds, who they are, categorizing them, comparing, contrasting them. This is, of course, for upper grades. Our general recommendation is that if students are learning Rashi really well, meaning they're not learning Rashi passively as something on the bottom of the Chumash that's added on, but that they can anticipate Rashi's question, understand Rashi's question, rephrase Rashi's answer in terms of the pasuk itself, categorize different kinds of Rashi, then they are ready for Mefarshim. So if we want to start Mefarshim in elementary, we would start with something like Ramban. If you want to go further, that could be, in high school, but really the Rashi skills are what predicate the skills that will allow them to be analytical learners of Mefarshim, not just passive ones. Okay, so this is Browse Standards. Again, you can navigate it by hovering over. You can navigate it by clicking on the screen. And don't forget that when you do click on a standard, you won't see the actual standard components until you go to the left to find the specific standard that you want to go to. Okay? Now we said that in the standards, there are links for the associated resources for each standard. Let's go into Browse Resources, which is really like the Amazon store for all of these resources in one place. So you might want to visit the website to look at the standards themselves. You might want to visit the website to find something that will help you teach one of the standards. So based on that, you'll choose what your starting point is. Is your starting point the standards? Is your starting point the resources? Okay. This is a booklet, if you click here, showing samples of each resource type that you can download for free so you know the general formats of each kind of resource. Here's a description of each resource category, but we'll go through it together. On the left, you have two ways to filter through the resources. You can filter them by standard. I'm only looking for resources that have to do with content, let's say. And you can even further divide into 2.1, 2.0, etc. Or you can navigate by the categories of resources. So we have all these different kinds of resources that are available. So let's say I want to look at only the assessments. I would click here. Or I can combine my two ways of searching and say I only want assessments for standard 4 comprehension, and then that is what I now have on my screen. Okay. Let's go through each category and talk about what they're about so that you know what's there for you and how to use it. We'll start with the booklets, because many people who come to the website, we'll start with standards for print, because many people who come to the website do so because they want to access the standards themselves. And we saw how to access them on the computer, but you might want to print it out, browse through it, mark it up. So here we have the standards, the complete standards, published in 2017. Then we have them broken down by grade, which is a little thinner booklet, a little easier to navigate. You can get the complete version with the backgrounds and the enduring understanding and everything like that, or just the table only, which is a chart of the standards themselves only. So you can browse through this and see which format you would like to download and print. Okay? Now we'll go through all of these different categories by looking through samples of each. The sample resources for the Zekelman Standards for Chumash is a booklet that you can download as well, but I'm using it here as a reference for you. And it has one example of each category of standards, of the standards. So the first category is assessments. Assessment, as we said, is a really important component of standards, because the reason that we're using standards and identifying standards is so that we can track students' progress by monitoring have they achieved this standard or not. In fact, there are schools that have turned over their report cards that instead of getting a general lump grade for Chumash, they get graded as either approaching mastery, achieved mastery, or exceeded mastery for vocabulary, for comprehension, for navigation, whatever it is the skill areas that they're working on. And this and by having the standards and assessing them in a way where each assessment and each question is linked to a specific standard, you're able to track students' progress and know not only are they an Aleph student or a Gimel student, but what areas are they Aleph in and what areas are they Gimel in. Most students are a little more complex than one letter grade, and we can even, if we want to be bold, do away with the grade entirely. But regardless, if we can help them identify their areas of strength and weakness, then we can move them along in that area. Otherwise, we just give a grade and we have no idea what they need before we move right along. We had a student in Los Angeles, and this is not the only such instance, where he was in first grade and the standards were just being rolled out at that stage. And this was a very bright student that everyone expected great things from. And when they gave the assessment, that it was separated by the different skill areas, the vocabulary words they were learning, separately from the comprehension and the higher order thinking. And they noticed, very interestingly, that he got 100 on all of the technical skills, but all the comprehension skills he was struggling with on this assessment. If he would have just taken an assessment that didn't really specify which skills and wasn't divided or analyzed that way, he would have gotten, 90 and moved right along. But since the teachers were looking specifically for which skills he hadn't mastered, they decided to dig deeper. The child was evaluated and actually found to have different processing disorders and challenges that made higher order thinking a struggle for him. So they put together an individual learning plan for the student, which continued throughout the years, and now he's successfully learning Gemara in 6th grade, where otherwise, if he would have arrived in 6th grade and suddenly needed to apply all these higher order thinking skills, no one would have known what's going on. Why is he suddenly struggling when he'd been such a successful student before? So assessment is a really powerful tool to bring our students to the goals of the standards. So what we have here is sample assessment questions, which you can use to help build your assessments for the standards. That's one way you can use them. Another way you can use them is simply to understand the standards themselves a little bit better. You can also use them for exercises and worksheets within the classroom. So for every standard, again, we're looking at 1.01. We list the standard, and then we created a variety of different kinds of assessment. And since it's hard to pin it to a specific grade level, we just ordered it in terms of rigor, in terms of difficulty, from eager to hard. So this is a self-assessment that students can do for how they treat a Chumash with respect. But let's look at, Yossi's carrying a heavy Chumash and he feels very tired. Multiple choice, where should he put the Chumash? Moving along, list or draw 3 things we do to show respect for a Chumash, or to write an essay, compare and contrast the way we regard a Chumash in a secular book, etc. Okay, so here, 1.01c, knowing the meaning of the mitzvah of limud haTorah on different levels. So, starting with multiple choice, what is the most important reason for why we learn Chumash? Moving along, all the way up to an essay question, explaining the deeper meaning of the mitzvah of Torah study, citing the chazal that was learned. So this is the kind of thing that you have for every single, or almost every single standard. Okay, and you can download it one standard at a time. These are the sample assessments. Okay, and that is what you'll see if you click on assessments. Supplements are actually all free of charge, and not all of them we created. Some of them we gathered from different areas. And the supplements are things that help you understand the standards. For example, list of the Klali Rashi, key concepts for each parsha, for content, examples of when you might want to compare different texts, high-frequency Chumash words, and you can again divide them by standard, and so forth. So we'll go out of order because I see that the next one in the booklet is a Vishinantam activity. Vishinantam is a set of activities which were developed to really be classroom ready and complete. So they include teacher's guides, they include different levels of the activity that you can give students on different grades or even within the same class. You can choose a level that's most appropriate for them. And they're designed and they're colorful and they're fun and they really, really deepen the learning in different areas. Okay, so let's look at an example, which is a passport. So a passport goes along with standard 2 where we talk about people. And the students are learning a little bit about Avraham Avinu in Parsha class, a little bit in Chumash class, and they can't quite put the pieces together. So they have a passport, and this is a sample for the youngest grade level. So let's say, so they're filling this in, and this is a sample that we created. So Rachel, they draw a picture, fill in whatever information they have about her, and as they learn, they fill in each place that she went to and what happened there, and it kind of helps them organize the chronology of her life story. And there's different features in each one, the profile, personal values, likes and dislikes, hobbies, etc. And the upper level passport templates are much more complex. Okay. So this is the Vishinamtam activities, and you have all kinds of interactive and multisensory tools for the different skill areas. Let's see what we have next in our booklet here. So, Introduction to Vocabulary and Language Skills. This is a very unique resource, and I'll tell you where you can find it. You can find it in something called Booklets. Introduction to Vocabulary and Language Skills right here. And this is basically a crash course in Dikduk. It's been used as a crash course for teachers and workshops. It can be used in a 6th or 7th or 8th grade classroom to brush students up on their skills and see where they're holding before you teach more advanced skills to them. Or parts of it can be taken out, adapted, illustrations added, etc., to make this a complete lesson for a 2nd or 3rd grade class. So how would we teach, for example, nouns? We first teach them in English, circle all the nouns, and then you work on it in Hebrew. Of course, this is in condensed form, but this is how one would approach the teaching of parts of speech. Okay, let's go through this. And that was an excerpt, and various different aspects of language skills are found there. Now we have a resource called Posters and Flashcards. Let's go back to the website. Which also goes, it supports the language skills as well, but it does so through posters and flashcards, which you can print and color and use in your classroom. Each of them comes in poster size to hang up on the wall, in binder size that students can tape to their desk or use as a cheat sheet in the back of their binder or as a study tool, etc. And many in flashcard form as well. So these were beautifully designed by Mary Perlstein and carefully vetted as well by the team for the dikduk and the accuracy and the usability for students. Okay, so here you see a sample poster for the Tamei HaMikra, which shows what it looks like, what it's called, and what it does. Next, we're going to go to teaching strategies and learning activities, also known as classroom activities in short, where you have lists of ideas that are tried and true and ways of teaching. Ooh, I still have my other things checked off, and ways of teaching the various different skills. So if you look, for example, for 4.3 passage comprehension, finding the main idea. So what does it mean to find the main idea? And what are the learning activities that you can do? So it's a guide basically for teaching the standard, and it comes with different templates and graphic organizers that students can use. Next, we have tools for Torah, which can be found here. And these were generously provided to us by Rabbi Chaim Bar-Chalevsky, who was excited to discover the Zekelman standards and took components of his workbooks and adapted them to align to the standards. So you have these different templates, which are designed for like an average, on average, grade 3 to 4 level. And he's working mainly on Parshas Taldes. However, they can be adapted. For example, the concept of a tidy title template can be adapted for any parak and pasuk, as well as any grade level. Okay. Then we have curriculum maps. Curriculum maps can be found here, and they're divided by parsha and parak. We have for some parshias and bereshis, not all, but based on feedback, we may develop them further. they're helpful to you. We have found that the greatest challenge teachers have had with the standards is matching them to your syllabus. So you know what skills that you need to teach, but what about the parsha that you're actually teaching? How do you marry the two? So in these curriculum maps, it shows the different teachable moments, the different standards opportunities you have. I know you don't have to do all of them. You can do some of them for each unit, for each topic in the psukim. So let's say the topic of, I believe this is the Malachim visiting Avram Avinu outside his tent. So in terms of Torah Shabbat essentials, you have the different hayrais that can be learned for lower level grades, for upper level grades. If you want to add to that, upper level is everything in the lower level and these added. You have the specific content, the people, the places, and then you have the different aspects of language and vocabulary. So you can either use this as a map and a guide for you to plan your lessons for this unit, or if you're taking on the concept of standards slowly, what you can do is you can highlight only, let's say, all of the standard 1 opportunities in each unit and incorporate them into your lessons. And if you're an administrator or a curriculum planner, you can definitely do that, Control F to find the specific standard that you're trying to reinforce and delete the rest, and then hand just that to your teachers for this is what we want to make sure to remember to bring out in each of these topics. Okay. Let's see what we have next. That's the end of the booklet. Let's see what else we have on the website that we didn't cover yet. Okay, and then the booklets are where we put anything else that you might want to use. The sample resources booklet that I just went through, the Talmud standards, the introduction to vocabulary and language skills. These are all more extensive resources, as well as a deployment guide. The deployment guide is a 12-step actually guide for administrators and curriculum directors for how to really implement standards across the school and how to deploy the whole DDI process that we discussed at the beginning of the session. Not just broadening our horizons as we did now as to what all the components are of teaching Chumash and how to teach them, but also how to implement a schedule of assessments and analysis of the assessments that is specific to the standards, how to roll it out in your school, how to best select which standard to work on first, etc. So this, in short, is the Zekelman standards. Are there any questions? You can just call out on the mic or ask in the chat. Okay. So you can use this website again to refer to reference the standards themselves to see what the scope and sequences and the specific skills are that you should be teaching. Or you can use it to access all of these resources and download them for your classroom. A word about that is that obviously in order to be able to continue to providing these resources in this physical world, many of them have costs attached, which are small costs, and once you purchase one of those resources, you can use it for all of your students for all of eternity. So you can copy it hundreds of times for yourself and your students. However, if the teacher next door really likes the sound of what you're doing in your Chumash class and wants to use that resource as well, please do not make a copy for her. Please direct her to the website where she can purchase and download it on her own. Now, last year we ran a 6-part webinar series where we gave an entire webinar on each one of these standards. Okay, so we had an entire webinar on how to unpack and really teach Standard 1, Hashkafa, etc. We had 2 webinars actually on language and dikduk. We can run that course again based on demand, or you can purchase a recording of the full series or of any one area that you want to focus on. And we do have various different webinars and training opportunities throughout the year. You can also always access us individually with an email, with a phone call, to ask your questions about implementation. And just a word for those of you who are starting in this world of Chumash standards, if you're a Chumash teacher, you've been doing a lot of this already. You teach vocabulary, you teach dikduk, you teach comprehension, you teach hashkafa. It's just a question of really honing in and systematizing that so you can assess it and track it and make sure that no pieces fall out of place, and as well as no student is disregarded on the learning journey. So you might want to start small by choosing a piece of the standards to systematize in that way. There are 2 pieces of advice that we give people as to where to start. You can either choose the one that comes easiest and most intuitively to you, let's say content, to just practice that concept of systematizing, of marking your lesson plans per standard, of dividing your assessments per standard, of analyzing your students' achievement per standard, and then creating action plans for each of them. Or some teachers have chosen the hashkafic component. It's not very hard, it's not very technical, but then when they did assess, they had like amazing surprises where they took for granted that all their students knew that, you know, the Torah is from Har Sinai and hasn't been changed over the years, and yet the students did not know that until it was taught explicitly. So you can choose something that's easier, that's more intuitive, that will allow you to plug in holes. Or you can choose the piece that's hardest, that's most needed. Oh my goodness, I really need to work on the dikta because I really want my students to be able to learn independently, and that is a huge piece to chew off. So only work on the diktuk, and within the diktuk, only work on the parts of speech for the time being until you've mastered it and you're ready to move on. Is there a way to track each student individually on how they're doing each standards? Absolutely. So if you look at the deployment guide and you look at our workshop called Ensuring Success for Each Student, which is recorded and is also being given again next week by Dr. Sarah Rosenfeld, you can see that you can analyze students' assessments results in a way that shows how they're doing on each standard. There are many softwares that now do this. And by the way, all of our sample assessment questions are on a platform called edulastic.com. I'll type it in the chat. So do a search for Zekelman Chumash or Judaic study standards, and you'll find all those questions. You can create your own assessment or just use the one that we loaded in there, and it automatically spits back for you graphs and charts of a whole student, of a whole class's performance, of an individual student's performance vis-a-vis each of the standards. Any other questions or comments? So go ahead, explore the website, explore the standards, see what direction you want to go in. If you'd like to work with us on implementing this, give us a call. If you'd like us to work with your school on implementing this, give us a call. We've had workshops, we've had consultations. We have a whole team of people who are really raising the bar on how students are learning Chumash. And the main thing is that everyone should have a lot of hatzlacha in guiding your students and teaching your students and giving them really a feeling of ownership, of kinyan within the Torah, because it's not just an academic skill, but it is a sense of belonging within Torah study. And that sense of belonging and that sense of competence is what propels them to keep learning and to keep growing, and also to live by what they learn. So thank you very much, and we look forward to being in touch with all of you. Have a very, very successful year, and already a ksiva v'chsima taiva, lashana taiva masuka to each one of you and your students as well.